After I refused to fund my golden stepbrother's failing business, Mom wrote an entire blog about my narcissistic personality disorder, posted about my abuse, used my full name. My employer found it. HR called me in. I got fired. But my lawyer sent her official legal documents. She deleted the blog. Too late. Screenshots forever. Now she's begging me not to sue because she'll lose the house and stepdad and stepbrother have nowhere to go. Sup, Reddit. Buckle up because this one's a wild ride. My own mother destroyed my career with a public smear campaign because I wouldn't bankroll my stepbrother's terrible business idea. She wrote a whole blog calling me a narcissist and an abuser, using my full name so everyone could find it. Cost me my job. Now she's facing a defamation lawsuit that'll take everything she has, and suddenly I'm the bad guy for not dropping it. Let me take you through this mess from the beginning. I'm 29, work in corporate compliance for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company in Phoenix. Not glamorous, but it pays well and offers solid benefits. I worked my way through state college, graduated with a finance degree and minimal debt, and spent 5 years climbing from entry-level auditor to senior compliance analyst. Current salary is around $78,000, which in Phoenix goes pretty far if you're smart with money. I own a small 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood that I bought 3 years ago. Nothing fancy, just a solid starter home with a 2-car garage and a backyard big enough for my dog. I drive a 2016 Honda Accord with 94,000 miles that runs perfectly and costs almost nothing to maintain. I max out my 401k contributions, keep 6 months of expenses in savings, and generally live below my means. My mother Linda married my stepfather Gerald when I was 15. Gerald brought his son Blake into the family. Blake was 13 at the time, and from day one, it was obvious who the favorite child would be. Gerald worshipped his son like the kid could do no wrong, and my mother fell right in line with that dynamic to keep her new husband happy. High school was a constant reminder that I was the outsider. Blake got a car for his 16th birthday, a used Mustang that Gerald spent months restoring with him. I got told to get a job if I wanted transportation. Blake's college tuition was fully covered by Gerald and my mother. I got a lecture about the value of student loans building character. Blake's apartment near campus was furnished by the family. I worked 2 part-time jobs while living in a shared dorm room with 3 other guys. The pattern continued into adulthood. Blake graduated with a marketing degree and bounced between entry-level positions for 6 years, quitting whenever things got difficult or he got bored. Never lasted more than 18 months anywhere. Meanwhile, Gerald and my mother would praise his entrepreneurial spirit and refusal to settle, like chronic unemployment was some kind of virtue. I kept my head down, focused on my career, and tried to maintain a civil relationship with everyone. Showed up for holidays, sent birthday cards, played the dutiful son even though the favoritism was obvious to everyone except them. My grandmother on my mother's side used to pull me aside at family gatherings and tell me she saw what was happening, that it wasn't fair, but to keep being the better person. She passed away 2 years ago and left me $25,000 in her will specifically, because she knew I was the only one who didn't expect handouts. Blake's latest venture started about 8 months ago. He announced at a family dinner that he was launching a social media consulting business. Not joining an existing agency, not getting certified in any particular platform, just declaring himself a consultant and expecting clients to appear. He printed business cards, created a website using a free template, and set up profiles on every platform claiming expertise he didn't have. The business went exactly how you'd expect. No clients, no revenue, just Blake posting motivational content about entrepreneurship and hustling while living in the apartment Gerald was still paying for. After 3 months of pretending to run a business, he started hitting up family members for investment capital. He called it raising seed funding. I called it begging for money to subsidize his unemployment. Blake needed $40,000 to really get things off the ground. The pitch was that he'd use the money for professional marketing materials, paid advertising campaigns, and hiring a part-time assistant. Never mind that he didn't have a single client to actually serve. Never mind that his only qualification was a bachelor's degree and 6 years of job hopping. He had confidence and a slide deck, which apparently was supposed to be enough. Gerald immediately pledged $15,000, which he didn't actually have. I found out later he took a loan against his retirement account to cover it. My mother started pressuring other family members to invest. My uncle declined politely. My aunt made an excuse about unexpected expenses. My cousin said she'd think about it and then stopped answering calls. That left me as the primary target. I was the one with a stable job, savings, and a house. In their minds, I was the obvious choice to bankroll Blake's fantasy. The campaign started subtly. My mother would mention during phone calls how hard Blake was working, how close he was to a breakthrough, how just a little bit of capital would make all the difference. Gerald would corner me at family events to talk about the incredible return on investment I could expect. Blake himself swung between approaches. Sometimes he'd play the humble brother card, talking about how much my support would mean to him. Other times, he'd pitch it like a serious business opportunity, showing me projected revenue charts that had no basis in reality. When neither approach worked, he'd get passive-aggressive, making comments about how some people support family, while others only think about themselves. I watched this circus for 2 months before they finally asked directly. We were at my mother's house for Sunday dinner, a tradition I'd been trying to phase out but kept getting guilted into attending. After we ate, Gerald cleared his throat in that way people do when they're about to say something rehearsed. He launched into a speech about family, opportunity, and legacy, about how successful people help lift others up, about how Blake's business could be something we'd all be proud of someday. The whole performance built to the big ask. They wanted me to invest $25,000 in Blake's social media consulting business. The number was so absurd, I actually laughed out loud before I could stop myself. $25,000 for a business with 0 clients, 0 revenue, and an owner with 0 relevant experience. They might as well have asked me to light the money on fire. At least that would have been honest. My mother's face went tight. Gerald looked offended. Blake stared at his plate. I composed myself and explained as calmly as I could why this wasn't going to happen. No business plan, no track record, no evidence of demand for the services. I told Blake I'd be happy to help him find a real job or look over his resume, but I wasn't investing in something that existed only on paper. Blake's response was pure entitlement. He accused me of being jealous of his ambition, said I was stuck in a corporate mindset and couldn't recognize innovation, claimed I was scared to take risks because I was too comfortable being mediocre. The kid who'd never held a job longer than 18 months was calling me mediocre, while asking for $25,000 to fund his pretend business. Gerald jumped in to defend his son, saying I clearly didn't understand entrepreneurship or I'd see the potential. My mother tried the guilt angle, reminding me of everything they'd done for me over the years. I asked her to name one specific thing they'd done for me financially as an adult. She couldn't. The conversation devolved into raised voices and accusations. I left before it could get worse. For 2 weeks after that dinner, they worked every angle they could think of. Phone calls, text messages, showing up at my house unannounced. My mother sent long emotional texts about family loyalty and how disappointed my grandmother would be in my selfishness. Gerald tried appealing to logic with more fictional revenue projections. Blake oscillated between apologizing for his outburst and defending his position. I held firm, stopped answering most of their calls, kept my responses brief and consistent. Not happening. Find other investors. Get a real job first. The boundary seemed clear enough. I figured they'd eventually accept it and move on. I was wrong about what they'd do next. 3 weeks after my final refusal, I started getting weird looks at work. Nothing I could put my finger on, just odd glances from colleagues and a sudden coolness from a few people I'd considered friends. My supervisor seemed more formal in our interactions. I brushed it off as workplace politics or my imagination until HR called me in for a meeting. The HR director and my department manager were waiting in the conference room with serious expressions. They asked me to sit down. On the table between us was a stack of printed pages. The HR director slid them across to me. They were screenshots from a blog. My mother's blog. I didn't even know she had a blog. Apparently, she'd started it 6 months earlier, posting occasionally about gardening, recipes, and other harmless content. Then 2 weeks ago, the content shifted dramatically. She'd written a series of posts about living with an adult child who has narcissistic personality disorder. She never said my name in the early posts, kept it vague, clinical, describing behaviors and patterns. Then came the detailed posts. Stories about my childhood, reframed as evidence of narcissistic tendencies. Normal teenage rebellion recast as manipulative behavior. My financial independence described as emotional withholding. Every interaction we'd ever had reinterpreted through this lens of mental illness and abuse. The recent post got specific. She wrote about Blake's business opportunity and my refusal to invest. Portrayed it as me punishing my stepbrother out of jealousy and spite. Described me as controlling, vindictive, and emotionally abusive to the entire family. Said I used money as a weapon to maintain power over everyone. Then came the post that brought it to my employer's attention. My mother wrote about how worried she was that my narcissistic tendencies were affecting my professional life. She speculated about whether my coworkers knew what kind of person they were dealing with. She wondered if my employer understood the kind of ethical issues that come with personality disorders like mine. And she used my full name, my full legal name, the same one listed on the company website, made it searchable, findable, linkable. Anyone who searched my name would find her blog calling me a narcissist and an abuser, suggesting I was unethical, questioning my mental stability. Someone at work had found it, probably searched my name for something unrelated and discovered these posts, shared them with others. The screenshots had circulated through the office before reaching HR. Now I was sitting in a conference room being asked to explain why there was public content online calling me mentally ill and abusive. I tried to explain that it was family drama, that my mother was upset about a financial disagreement, that none of it was true. The HR director listened with a neutral expression that told me nothing. My manager looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to believe me but wasn't sure she could. The problem wasn't whether the blog posts were true. The problem was that they existed. Our company works with federal regulators and healthcare providers. We handle sensitive information and maintain strict ethical standards. Having an employee publicly accused of narcissistic personality disorder and abusive behavior, even by a family member with an axe to grind, was a liability they couldn't ignore. The HR director explained their position carefully. They weren't saying the accusations were true. They weren't taking sides in a family dispute, but they had to consider how this looked to clients, regulators, and other stakeholders. If someone searched my name and found these posts, it could reflect poorly on the company. In an industry built on trust and ethical conduct, perception matters as much as reality. They offered me two options. I could resign voluntarily with a neutral reference and 2 weeks of severance pay, or they could terminate me for conduct unbecoming, which would go on my employment record and make future job searches difficult. They gave me 24 hours to decide. The meeting ended with polite formality that barely masked their discomfort. I walked out of that conference room in a daze. 10 years of building my career, maintaining a spotless record, advancing steadily through merit and hard work, all threatened by a blog I didn't know existed, written by my own mother because I wouldn't give my stepbrother $25K for his fake business. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 30 minutes, reading through the blog posts on my phone. Every single one was designed to destroy my reputation. She'd crafted a narrative where I was the villain, the abuser, the narcissist, took real events and twisted them beyond recognition, made normal boundaries sound like cruelty, made financial responsibility look like emotional manipulation. The comments on the post made it worse. Strangers offering her sympathy and advice on dealing with a narcissistic child. People sharing their own stories of family members with personality disorders. Everyone accepting her version of events without question, because why would a mother lie about her own son? I drove home and did what I should have done immediately. Started taking screenshots of everything, every blog post, every comment, every piece of her smear campaign. Saved them with timestamps and URLs. Downloaded the entire blog as a PDF. Made multiple backups across different devices and cloud storage. If she deleted anything, I'd have proof it existed. Then I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in defamation and employment law. Found her through a colleague who dealt with a similar situation years ago. She agreed to see me the next morning for an emergency consultation. That night, I barely slept. Kept refreshing the blog to see if my mother noticed the traffic spike from people at my work reading it. Checked my email obsessively in case HR changed their mind about giving me 24 hours. Ran through worst-case scenarios where this followed me to every future employer, where I became unemployable because my mother decided to lie about me on the internet. The lawyer's office was in a high-rise downtown. Her name was Catherine Sullivan, early 50s, with the kind of confidence that comes from winning cases regularly. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she asked to see everything. The blog posts, the HR meeting summary, my employment history, any communication I'd had with my mother about the situation. I showed her the screenshots, the printed pages from HR, my text message history with my mother. She spent 20 minutes reviewing everything in silence. Finally, she looked up and asked the question that mattered. Did you ever give her permission to write about you publicly using your real name? Number. Did you ever discuss or consent to her sharing details about your life online? Number. Had she sent you these posts or warned you they existed? Number. Catherine leaned back in her chair and delivered her assessment. This was textbook defamation. False statements presented as fact, published to third parties, causing measurable harm to my reputation and employment. The narcissistic personality disorder claims were particularly actionable because they were specific, damaging, and completely fabricated. The speculation about my professional ethics was even worse. My mother had essentially accused me of being unfit for my job in searchable, permanent writing. She could send a cease and desist letter demanding immediate removal of all posts mentioning me. We could threaten a defamation lawsuit unless my mother issued a public retraction and apology. If she complied, I might salvage my job situation. If she didn't, we'd file suit and let a court sort it out. The consultation fee was $400. A formal cease and desist letter would cost another $800. If it went to actual litigation, I was looking at $15,000 minimum in legal fees, possibly more if it dragged out. Catherine was clear about the costs and realistic about the outcomes. Defamation cases are hard to win, expensive to pursue, and often settle for less than the actual damages. But I had something most defamation plaintiffs don't: clear evidence of damages. I'd lost my job directly because of her posts. I could prove the posts were false. I could demonstrate that she'd acted with malice, targeting my employment specifically. Catherine thought we had a strong case if it came to trial, but she also thought my mother would fold once she realized the legal exposure. I authorized Catherine to send the cease and desist letter immediately. She drafted it that afternoon, laying out the defamation claims in precise legal language, demanding removal of all posts within 48 hours, requiring a written apology and public retraction, warning that failure to comply would result in a lawsuit seeking damages for lost employment, emotional distress, and reputational harm. The letter went out certified mail with tracking. Catherine also emailed it to my mother to ensure she couldn't claim she never received it. Then we waited. I used the waiting time to make my decision about work, chose resignation over termination, signed the papers, took the severance, and started the humiliating process of job hunting with a ticking time bomb of internet defamation attached to my name. My mother's response came faster than expected, not to the lawyer, but directly to me. She called my phone 16 times in 3 hours, left voicemails ranging from confused to angry to tearful, sent text messages demanding to know why I was threatening her with lawyers over a simple blog, said she was just expressing her feelings and I had no right to censor her. I didn't respond to any of it, forwarded everything to Catherine and let her handle it. The lawyer called me that evening with an update. My mother had left her a voicemail. She was upset, didn't understand why this was a legal issue, insisted she'd only written the truth about her experiences. Catherine had called her back and explained in small words exactly how defamation law works. 48 hours came and went. The blog posts were still up. My mother had done nothing except complain about being legally threatened. Catherine filed the lawsuit. She moved quickly, submitting the complaint to county court with all our evidence attached. My mother was served at her house 3 days later. The process server reported that she'd opened the door, taken the papers, read the first page, and started crying. That's when the panic calls really started. My mother, Gerald, Blake, even some extended family members I barely knew. Everyone wanted to talk about the lawsuit, convince me to drop it, explain that I was overreacting. The common theme was that family doesn't sue family, that legal action was extreme, that we should work this out privately. I maintained radio silence, blocked their numbers, filtered their emails, ignored social media messages, let Catherine handle all communication. My mother tried to reach me through my neighbors, my former co-workers, even the people at my gym. The desperation was obvious. She'd finally realized that actions have consequences. A week after being served, she deleted the blog entirely. Not just the posts about me, the whole thing. Took down the entire website like that would make the lawsuit disappear. She sent Catherine an email saying she'd removed everything and hoped that resolved the issue. Catherine replied that destroying evidence doesn't eliminate liability for defamation that already occurred. The damage was done, the screenshots existed, and the lawsuit would proceed. That's when Gerald called Catherine's office. He wanted to negotiate a settlement, offered to pay my legal fees if I'd drop the suit. Catherine told him we'd consider settlement discussions after discovery was complete, and we'd fully documented the damages. She wanted medical records, employment files, and depositions from everyone involved. Gerald backed off quickly when he realized this wasn't going to be cheap or easy. Blake tried a different approach. He sent me a long email apologizing for everything, said he felt terrible about what had happened, that he'd told my mother not to write those posts, that he never wanted any of this. Classic attempt to play innocent bystander. I forwarded it to Catherine without responding. She noted it as potential evidence that they'd discussed the blog post beforehand, which suggested coordination. My mother made one final attempt at direct contact. She showed up at my house on a Wednesday afternoon. I watched through the window as she knocked on my door, rang the doorbell, knocked again. She stood there for almost 10 minutes before leaving an envelope wedged in my doorframe. I waited until she drove away before retrieving it. Inside was a handwritten letter. 5 pages of apologies, explanations, and justifications. She was sorry for hurting me. She hadn't meant for it to affect my job. She was just so frustrated and angry about the money situation. Blake really needed help, and she couldn't understand why I wouldn't support family. The blog had been her way of venting. She never expected anyone from my work to find it. The letter gradually shifted from apology to blame. Maybe if I'd been more flexible about Blake's business, none of this would have happened. Maybe if I valued family relationships over money, she wouldn't have been so upset. Maybe if I understood how hard things were for them financially, I'd be more forgiving now. The final page was a plea. Dropping the lawsuit would save the family from financial destruction. They'd already spent thousands on their own lawyer just to understand the complaint. If this went to trial, they'd lose everything. Their house was already leveraged because of Gerald's loan for Blake's business. They couldn't afford a judgment against them. Blake would have nowhere to live. Gerald's retirement would be gone. I'd be destroying 3 lives over hurt feelings. I photographed every page and sent them to Catherine. She read through it and called me an hour later. This letter was gold for our case. My mother had admitted to writing the posts out of anger. She'd acknowledged that she knew about the employment consequences. She'd connected the blog to the business funding dispute, showing motive. And she'd threatened financial hardship as leverage, which would play terribly to a jury. Discovery moved forward. Catherine subpoenaed my employment records from the pharmaceutical company. They provided documentation of the HR investigation, the meeting notes, and the screenshots that had circulated internally. She deposed my former supervisor, who confirmed that my resignation was directly related to the blog situation. She collected statements from former colleagues about the change in workplace atmosphere after the posts were discovered. We documented everything. The blog posts with timestamps showing how long they'd been public. Analytics data I'd managed to retrieve showing hundreds of views. Evidence that the posts appeared in search results for my name. Screenshots of comments from strangers discussing my supposed mental illness. The whole humiliating paper trail of my mother's campaign to destroy my reputation. Catherine also documented my damages. Lost wages from my job, lost benefits and 401k matching. The impact on my job search, evidenced by the number of applications I'd submitted with no responses. Expert testimony from an employment counselor about the difficulty of finding work with defamatory content ranking high in name searches. Emotional distress, quantified through medical records from the therapist I'd started seeing to deal with the stress. We had a strong case. Multiple witnesses, clear evidence, documented damages, and my mother's own admission that she'd written the posts in anger. Catherine estimated we could win $150,000 to $200,000 at trial, possibly more if the jury was sympathetic. Even a settlement would likely be in the $75,000 to $100,000 range. That's when my mother's lawyer requested a meeting. He wanted to discuss resolution without going to trial. Catherine agreed to meet at her office, with me present but not required to speak. I wanted to see this, wanted to watch my mother squirm after what she'd done. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. My mother arrived with Gerald and their attorney, a middle-aged guy who looked like he handled divorces and estate planning, not defamation defense. Catherine had set up the conference room formally, with the evidence binders stacked on her side of the table. Power move that established we held all the cards. Their lawyer opened with pleasantries that everyone ignored. Then he laid out their position. My mother deeply regretted the blog posts. They'd been written in a moment of emotional distress, and she never intended to cause professional harm. She'd already deleted everything and was willing to issue a formal apology. They hoped we could reach a reasonable settlement without the expense and stress of a trial. Catherine listened politely, then opened the top evidence binder. She walked them through the case methodically. The posts weren't momentary emotional distress. They were a calculated campaign spanning 2 weeks. My mother hadn't deleted them out of remorse. She'd deleted them after being served with a lawsuit. The apology offer only came after she realized the legal exposure. And the damages were severe, documentable, and directly caused by her actions. She showed them the employment records. The HR investigation triggered specifically by the blog. My supervisor's statement about my forced resignation. The expert analysis of how the posts had damaged my career prospects. The therapist's notes about the impact on my mental health. The financial calculations showing lost income, lost benefits, and lost future earning potential. Their lawyer tried to negotiate, suggested $25,000 as a settlement figure. Catherine didn't laugh, but it was close. She countered with $125,000, payable immediately, plus a written apology published on the same platform where the defamation occurred. She also wanted them to cover all my legal fees to date, another $8,000 and counting. My mother started crying. Gerald looked angry. Their lawyer asked for a private conversation with his clients. Catherine and I left the conference room and waited in her office. 20 minutes later, they called us back. The crying had intensified. Gerald looked defeated. Their lawyer did the talking. They couldn't afford $125,000. Their house had maybe $80,000 in equity after the second mortgage Gerald had taken for Blake's business. They were living on Gerald's reduced income after he'd taken early retirement. Blake wasn't contributing anything. My mother's part-time bookkeeping job barely covered utilities. A judgment that size would force them to sell the house and declare bankruptcy. Catherine's response was professional, but firm. The settlement offer reflected the actual damages caused by their defamation. If they couldn't pay, the court could establish a payment plan with interest. Or we could proceed to trial where a jury might award even more. The amount was negotiable within reason, but we weren't accepting anything less than 6 figures. Their lawyer asked for time to explore financing options. Catherine gave them 2 weeks. The meeting ended with my mother trying to catch my eye, looking for some sign of mercy or flexibility. I kept my expression neutral and left without speaking. This was business now, not family. Over the next 10 days, they tried everything. Gerald attempted to take another loan against his retirement account, but he'd already borrowed the maximum allowed. My mother contacted every family member she could think of, looking for someone to lend them money. Blake started a fundraising page online that got 7 donations totaling $340 before someone reported it and the platform took it down. They offered their house as collateral for a structured settlement. Catherine had it appraised. Between the first and second mortgages, there was only $73,000 in equity, not enough to cover the settlement figure even if we accepted the house in lieu of cash. Their lawyer came back with a revised offer. $70,000 paid over 5 years with interest, plus the written apology and coverage of legal fees. Catherine presented it to me as a decision point. We could accept the structured settlement, which guaranteed eventual payment, but spread it over time. Or we could reject it, go to trial, likely win a larger judgment, but face years of collection efforts that might never recover the full amount. The question was whether I wanted guaranteed money or the satisfaction of a court victory. I thought about what I actually wanted. The money mattered, but it wasn't just about compensation. I wanted acknowledgement that what she did was wrong. I wanted consequences that actually changed behavior. I wanted her to understand that you can't destroy someone's life without facing repercussions. The structured settlement didn't feel like enough. Too easy for them to make minimum payments and claim they'd settled the debt. Too easy for my mother to play victim about having to pay her own son. I wanted a judgment on the record. I wanted a judge or jury to officially declare that she defamed me, caused measurable harm, and owed damages. We rejected the offer. Catherine informed their lawyer we were proceeding to trial. The court date was set for 4 months out. My mother sent me another letter, this one shorter and more desperate, begging me to reconsider, explaining that losing their house would devastate Gerald's health. Blake had no backup plan, nowhere else to go. She'd made a terrible mistake, but the punishment was too severe. I didn't respond to that letter either, just filed it with the rest of the evidence. Catherine used it in her pretrial motions to demonstrate ongoing attempts to manipulate me emotionally. The judge was not impressed by their financial hardship arguments. Defendants don't get to defame someone and then claim poverty as a defense. 2 months before trial, their lawyer filed a motion to dismiss based on First Amendment protections, argued that my mother's blog was protected speech, opinion rather than statement of fact, and covered by parental relationship privilege. Catherine filed a response brief that demolished each argument. The posts weren't opinion. They were false factual claims about a diagnosed mental disorder. They weren't protected speech. They were defamatory lies published with malice. And there's no such thing as parental relationship privilege for adult children. The judge denied their motion to dismiss, scheduled the case for trial as planned, indicated in his ruling that the evidence presented appeared to support a strong defamation claim. My mother's lawyer tried one more settlement discussion, offered $90,000, their absolute maximum, paid over 10 years with a balloon payment when they sold the house. Catherine countered at $110,000 minimum, with stricter payment terms and personal guarantees from both my mother and Gerald. We were 3 weeks from trial when they caved completely. Agreed to $110,000 paid over 7 years with interest, written apology published and maintained on a public blog for minimum 1 year, coverage of all legal fees, and a clause prohibiting any public discussion of me by any of them. The alternative was going to trial, where they'd likely lose worse and face even higher damages. They signed the settlement agreement in Catherine's office, both of them looking broken. The written apology went up on a blog created specifically for that purpose. My mother had to write that she'd made false statements about me having narcissistic personality disorder, that she'd lied about abusive behavior, that her posts were motivated by anger over a financial disagreement, and that she deeply regretted the harm caused to my reputation and career. The blog was optimized to appear in searches for my name, correcting the record for anyone who might have seen the original posts. The first payment came through 30 days later. The legal fees were paid in full. Catherine had negotiated personal liability for both my mother and Gerald, meaning if they defaulted, we could pursue their assets directly. The house was encumbered with a lien securing the settlement debt. Blake was not a party to the agreement, but was bound by the prohibition on public discussion through his residence in the home. I used part of the first payment to cover my living expenses while I continued job hunting. The defamation was still affecting my search. Potential employers would search my name and find references to the case, even though the apology now appeared in results too. Catherine suggested I hire a reputation management company to help bury the old content and promote positive information about me. 6 months after the settlement, I finally landed a new job. Different company, different industry, slight pay cut from my previous position, but with room for growth. The hiring manager had found the apology blog during his background check and actually brought it up in the interview. Asked about it directly, wanted to hear my side. I explained honestly what had happened. He appreciated the transparency and said he respected that I'd stood up for myself legally rather than letting it slide. My mother made the payments on time for the first year. Never contacted me directly. I heard through extended family that she'd gone back to work full-time to cover the monthly amount. Gerald had come out of retirement to take a part-time job at a hardware store. Blake had finally gotten a regular job doing social media management for a local business, though he'd never speak to me again, according to my uncle. Their house became a source of constant stress for them. They couldn't refinance with the settlement lien attached. Couldn't sell without paying off the full remaining balance immediately. Were stuck making payments on both mortgages, plus the settlement amount, leaving them barely enough to live on. The consequences were exactly what Catherine had designed them to be. Severe enough to matter, but sustainable enough that they couldn't escape through bankruptcy. I moved on with my life. The new job turned into a career opportunity I wouldn't have found otherwise. Got promoted within 18 months to a senior analyst position. Met someone who actually understood healthy family boundaries and didn't think I was crazy for enforcing them. Started rebuilding my professional reputation through actual work rather than online image management. The blog posts are still out there in archives and screenshots, preserved forever on the internet. But now they're accompanied by the court settlement, the apology, and the documentation of what really happened. Anyone who searches deep enough finds the whole story, not just my mother's lies. The truth didn't erase the damage, but it provided context that mattered. People ask if I feel guilty about the financial impact on my mother and Gerald, if I regret pushing so hard instead of accepting an easier settlement, if I think the punishment was proportional to the crime. My answer is always the same. She tried to destroy my career and reputation because I wouldn't give my stepbrother $25,000 for a fake business. She made it public, searchable, and permanent. She gave me no warning and no chance to respond before it cost me my job. So that's my story, Reddit. Mother writes blog calling me mentally ill and abusive because I won't fund stepbrother's fake business. Blog cost me my real job at a real company. I sue for defamation. She deletes everything but screenshots live forever. Settlement for $110,000 plus apology destroys their finances. They beg me to drop it, but consequences don't work that way. Some bridges you burn. Some you blow up with legal consequences. This one got the full demolition treatment, and I sleep fine at night knowing I earned every dollar of that settlement. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.